The day my father looked me in the eye across that courtroom and said, "You always did love playing dress up," I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just straightened my jacket, smoothed the ribbon bar over my left chest, and sat down. The judge hadn't come in yet. My aunt was whispering something to her lawyer. My uncle was staring at his phone, and my father, the man who hadn't called me once in 3 years, was smirking at my uniform like it was a Halloween costume. He had no idea what it meant. He never did. I grew up in Sudbury, not the pretty part people imagine when they think of Northern Ontario. Not the lakes, not the pines in the fall. I grew up on the east side in a semi-detached on a street where every house looked exactly the same and everyone knew everyone else's business by Tuesday morning. My grandmother's house was the only different one. It sat on a corner lot on the far edge of town, a two-story with a wraparound porch, and an old sugar maple in the front yard that turned so red every October it looked like it was on fire. My grandmother, everyone called her Granddaughty, though her full name was Dorothy, had bought that house in 1971 with money she'd saved working the hospital laundry for 9 years. She used to say, "Nobody gave me a single cent for it." She said it like a point of pride, not bitterness. She said it the way people say things they need you to remember. I spent every weekend there from the time I was 4 until I was 17. My parents' marriage was one of those slow implosions. Not loud, not dramatic, just two people who had stopped pretending to like each other. When things got tense at home, and they got tense often, Granddaughty's was where I went. She taught me to bake butter tarts. She let me stay up too late watching old movies. She had a garden in the back with tomatoes and beans and one rose bush she'd been nursing for 20 years, and on summer evenings we'd sit on the porch, and she'd tell me stories about growing up in Cape Breton, about her own mother, about how the women in our family had always had to be tougher than anyone gave them credit for. "You're the one who got it," she told me once, when I was maybe 12. I didn't know what she meant. I asked her. She just patted my hand and said, "You will." My father didn't have much use for Granddaughty's house or Granddaughty's stories. He and my mother divorced when I was 15, and after that he moved to Barrie and started a new life that seemed to involve as little contact with me as possible. He remarried, had a daughter with his new wife, a little girl I've met exactly twice. He came to my high school graduation because my mother shamed him into it and spent most of the reception checking his watch. My uncle, my father's younger brother, was cut from the same cloth. He lived in Mississauga, drove a leased BMW, and called Granddaughty twice a year, Christmas and her birthday. My aunt on my father's side was warmer on the surface, but she had that particular talent some people have of making generosity feel like a transaction, like every kind thing she did was being quietly tallied somewhere. None of them knew what Granddaughty had decided to do with the house. None of them knew what she'd told me. I joined the Canadian Army Reserve at 18, the summer before I started nursing at Laurentian. It was something Granddaughty had quietly encouraged. She'd read the pamphlet I'd brought home and said, "That's a serious thing to do. You're serious enough." I took it as the highest compliment she'd ever paid me. I finished my nursing degree in 4 years, did my basic training in the summers, then applied for the regular force. I was posted to CFB Putawawa at 23. I was deployed to Latvia as part of Operation Reassurance at 25 6 months, then another 4 as an extension when a colleague had a family emergency and needed to come home. That 10 months was the longest I'd been away from Granddaughty. We wrote letters, actual letters, not emails. She preferred it. She said email felt like shabbing into a hallway, but a letter felt like sitting down together. I kept every one of hers in a bundle tied with kitchen twine at the bottom of my kit bag. My neighbor Mrs. Kowalski looked in on Granddaughty twice a week while I was gone. Granddaughty had a small tabby cat named Pip that Mrs. Kowalski fed when I was deployed, and she had a part-time home care aide who came Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'd arranged all of it before I left. Paid for 6 months of the aid out of my own pocket before Granddaughty waved me off and said she'd cover the rest herself. "I'm not helpless," she told me. "Go do your job." I came home in March. Granddaughty was thinner than I remembered. She told me it was just winter weight. She always lost weight in winter, she said. I made a note to call her doctor. She died in September. A stroke. She was 81. She was alone in the house when it happened, and by the time Mrs. Kowalski noticed the lights hadn't come on in the evening and called the paramedics, it was too late. I was in Petawawa when my phone rang. I sat on the edge of my cot in the dark for a very long time after I hung up. I drove to Sudbury the next morning. I had compassionate leave, 5 days. I used 4 of them to handle the immediate arrangements and then drove back, because there was nothing else I could do. The funeral was the following week. I took more leave. I stood at the grave in my uniform because it was the only formal thing I owned that was clean and pressed, and because Granddaughty would have liked it. She had always said she respected people who showed up for things properly. My father came to the funeral, so did my uncle and my aunt. We said the things people say at funerals. My father hugged me with one arm, the way you hug a coworker you barely know. The will was read 3 weeks later. Granddaughty had a lawyer in Sudbury, a woman named Mrs. Fairweather, who had a small office above a pharmacy on Elm Street and had clearly been doing this work long enough to have seen everything. She sat across from us at a round table. Me, my father, my uncle, my aunt, and 2 cousins who had flown in from Calgary. Granddaughty left her savings, about $62,000, split equally among her grandchildren. She left her jewelry to be divided as agreed, with a specific note that the garnet brooch was mine. She left the house, the property, and everything in it to me. The silence in that room lasted about 4 seconds. My uncle said, "That can't be right." My father looked at me like I'd done something to him personally. Mrs. Fairweather read it again. It was right. The call started that same evening. My father, first, measured it first, then not. He said Granddaughty had been influenced. He said she hadn't been in full possession of her faculties at the end. He said, carefully, that this was going to need to be sorted out. My uncle called an hour later and said essentially the same things in a louder voice. My aunt sent an email that was 300 words of concern about family fairness that managed never once to say what she actually meant. I was sitting in my car outside a Tim Hortons in Petawawa when I got the last call, eating a sandwich I'd bought at 11 because I hadn't eaten since morning, and I remember thinking, this is exactly what Granddaughty warned me about. She had warned me, not loudly, not dramatically. She'd mentioned it once, about 2 years before she died, when we were sitting on the porch after dinner. She'd said, "When I go, there will be noise about the house. Just hold on." That was all. I hadn't pushed her on it because Granddaughty said things once and meant them, and pushing her was never useful. I held on. My father retained a lawyer. So did my uncle, the same lawyer, which Mrs. Fairweather told me was not unusual in family disputes, and also was not ideal for me, as it meant they were coordinating. They filed a challenge to the will, grounds undue influence and testamentary incapacity. In plain language, they were saying I had manipulated an old woman and that she hadn't known what she was doing. I read that filing standing in my kitchen at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I read it twice, and I thought about Granddaughty saying, "Nobody gave me a single cent for it." I thought about her saying it like a point of pride. I couldn't afford a lawyer. Not a good one, not right away. Military nursing pay in Canada is decent, but not litigation budget decent, and the initial retainer quotes I got ranged from $8,000 to $15,000. I put $1,200 on my credit card for a consultation with a wills and estates lawyer in Ottawa. A quiet man named Mr. Osei who had 20 years of experience and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen families do this to each other many times. He told me my case was strong. He told me what it would cost to take it all the way. He told me to gather every piece of documentation I could find. I spent the next 4 months gathering letters. I had all of them, both directions, dated and in Granddaughty's handwriting. Bank records showing the money I transferred for the home care aid. Phone records. Mrs. Kowalski's contact information. a statutory declaration from Granddaddy's family doctor, who had seen her 6 weeks before she died and assessed her as cognitively sharp. Mrs. Fairweather had kept detailed notes, as good lawyers do, and she had a written record of every conversation with Granddaddy about the will over a period of 3 years. 3 years. Granddaddy had been thinking about this for 3 years. She'd changed her will twice in that time, both changes witnessed and dated. She had known exactly what she was doing. I sent everything to Mr. O.C. He read it all and said, "They have very little to stand on." "Then why are they doing it?" I asked. He looked at me with that particular patience of his and said, "Because they thought you wouldn't push back." I was deployed again in January, this time to Poland, a 4-month rotation. I know how that sounds. I know people wonder how someone manages a legal case from overseas, how anything gets done. The answer is, slowly and with a lot of late-night emails. Mr. O.C. was patient. Mrs. Fairweather was patient. Mrs. Kowalski, who had asked to be a potential witness, was patient. And I had learned, over years in the Army, that most things worth doing require you to just keep showing up, even when showing up is inconvenient. I called Pip's temporary caretaker, a young woman who lived 2 doors from the house, a nursing student named Bex, who I'd found through a notice board at Laurentian, every 2 weeks to check in. Pip was fine. The house was fine. I was 10 hours ahead and exhausted and filing court documents on a laptop balanced on my knees in a shared room with 3 other people, but everything was fine. My father's side filed their case formally in February. The hearing was set for May in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, Sudbury Courthouse. I flew home from Warsaw in April. I had 4 days of decompression leave, then I drove to Sudbury and walked through the house for the first time since the funeral. It was cold. Granddaddy had always kept it warm, and without her it felt different. That particular silence of a house that's waiting. The rosebush in the back garden had been pruned by Mrs. Kowalski over the winter and was already putting out new growth. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the wood of the cabinets and something herbal I'd never been able to identify and had finally decided was just Granddaddy herself. That some people are so present in a place that they leave a trace. I sat at the kitchen table and I wrote her a letter. I don't know why. I just did. I told her what was happening. I told her I was going to take care of it. Then I drove back to Ottawa, stayed at a friend's place, and spent a week with Mr. O.C. preparing. The morning of the hearing, I woke up at 5:30. Old habit. I made coffee in my friend's kitchen and stood at the window watching it get light over the river. And I thought about what I was going to walk into. My father and uncle would be there with their shared lawyer, a man I'd seen at the consultation stage, smooth and confident. The kind of lawyer who bills $400 an hour and knows it. My aunt would be in the gallery. There would be other people, strangers, doing their own court business in a building designed to make everything feel official and irreversible. And I had my evidence. I had my letters. I had 3 years of Granddaddy's deliberate, documented decisions. I had Mr. O.C., who was not flashy but was thorough in a way that I had come to trust the way you trust a good medic. Quietly, completely. I put on my uniform, not because I was trying to make a statement, because it was the right thing to wear, because I was appearing before a court and the uniform is what I wear when I appear somewhere formally, because Granddaddy would have understood that. I drove to the courthouse. I parked. I walked through the front doors. My father was in the hallway with his lawyer. My uncle was beside him. My aunt was a few feet away with a coffee. My father saw me and his face did something complicated, and then he said it. "You always did love playing dress-up." My uncle smiled at the floor. I looked at my father for a moment. I thought about saying something. I thought about all the things I could have said. About the nights I spent in a shared room in Poland filing motions on a laptop. About the letters I'd written from Latvia. About the home care aid I'd paid for. About every visit and every phone call and every butter tart. I thought about all of it, and I said nothing because there was nothing that needed to be said to him. There was someone else in that building whose opinion mattered, and it wasn't my father. I walked past him and went inside. The hearing took 4 hours. Mr. Osei was exactly what I needed him to be. He walked the judge through the timeline, the 3-year history of the will, the 2 revisions, the documented consultations with Mrs. Fairweather, the medical assessment 6 weeks before Granddaughty's death. He introduced the letters, not all of them, just the relevant ones, dated in her handwriting, showing a woman who was fully present, fully deliberate, fully herself. The other side's lawyer made the arguments I'd expected: dependence, isolation, undue influence. He said I had been the primary person in Granddaughty's life in her final years, which was true, and suggested that this proximity was inherently suspicious, which made Mr. Paxton Osei look up from his notes with an expression I can only describe as carefully controlled. The applicant was deployed overseas for a combined period of approximately 14 months during the period in question, Mr. Osei said. The will was drafted, revised, and finalized by an independent solicitor over 3 years. The deceased had regular contact with her physician, her neighbor, and her home care aide, all of whom have provided statements attesting to her full cognitive capacity. The suggestion that the applicant exerted undue influence while stationed in Latvia and Poland is not supported by the evidence. The judge, a woman, maybe 60, with reading glasses on a chain and a manner that reminded me of the best charge nurses I'd ever worked with, utterly unimpressed by anything that wasted her time, looked at the other side's lawyer and asked him to clarify the nature of the evidence of incapacity. He mentioned that Granddaughty had been 81 and had relied heavily on me. The judge looked at him for a moment and then wrote something down. It went like that. The other side's case was a feeling, dressed up in legal language. My case was 3 years of paperwork. At the end of the hearing, the judge delivered her ruling from the bench. Not always done, but she did it that day. She found no evidence of undue influence. She found no evidence of undue influence. She found no evidence of testamentary incapacity. She upheld the will in its entirety. She looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Your grandmother appears to have been a woman who knew her own mind." She was, I said. Then this matter is concluded. My father left without speaking to me. My uncle was already through the doors before the judge had finished. My aunt paused near me for a moment, like she was considering saying something, and then seemed to decide against it and walked away. I stood in the courthouse hallway with Mr. Osei, who was putting his papers back into his briefcase with the same careful efficiency he did everything. "What happens now?" I asked him. "You own a house in Sudbury," he said. I drove back to Sudbury that afternoon. I let myself in through the back door, which I'd always done, because that was the door Granddaughty used. I put the kettle on. I stood in her kitchen and I looked out through the window at the garden, at the rosebush with its new growth, and I thought about all the things she'd said to me over the years that I had stored up and kept. Nobody gave me a single cent for it. "You're the one who got it. When I go, there will be noise about the house. Just hold on." She was right about all of it. I poured my tea and took it out to the porch and sat in her chair, the old wooden one with the faded cushion she'd been meaning to replace for 15 years. The sugar maple was starting to bud. In a few months it would be red again, the way it always was, the way it had been every October I could remember. I had a week of leave. I was going to use it here, in this house, in this chair. I was going to call Mrs. Kowalski and thank her properly. I was going to call Bex and arrange to get Pip home. I was going to go through the kitchen cupboards and find the butter tart recipe, which Granddaughty had written on an index card in her cramped, slanted handwriting and tucked somewhere sensible that I would have to actually look for. My father would not call. My uncle would not call. That was fine. That had always been fine, even when I told myself it wasn't. Some things you don't get to choose. You don't choose your family. You don't choose the people who disappoint you or the ways they do it. You don't choose whether they show up or stay or decide that what was yours was somehow also theirs. But you choose how you stand. You choose whether you gather the letters and file the motions and get on the plane and come home and walk into the room in the thing you earned and let it speak for itself. That's what Granddaughty knew about me, I think. That's what she meant. The maple was budding. Pip was coming home tomorrow. The tea was still warm. I held on. And this was what holding on looked like. I keep coming back to something Granddaughty said that I almost didn't hold on to. Not a speech, not a lesson with a clear beginning and end, just a sentence on a porch on an ordinary evening. When I go, there will be noise about the house. Just hold on. She said it once. She didn't repeat herself. She trusted me to carry it. I think about what actually happened in that courtroom, not the drama of it, not my father's smirk or my uncle leaving before the ruling was even finished, but the mechanics of it. Why did it go the way it did? Not luck, not fate. Granddaughty had spent 3 years building a case for her own intentions. She had revised her will twice, documented every conversation with her lawyer, kept her doctor's appointments, stayed sharp and present and deliberate, right up until the end. She did the right thing quietly over years when no one was watching. That's what held. Not the emotion of it, the integrity of it. The fact that when you looked at the paper trail, you saw a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and had never once wavered. I think about that when I think about what I did in the years leading up to that hearing. I paid for the home care aide. I arranged Mrs. Kowalski's check-ins. I wrote letters from Latvia and filed court documents from Poland on a laptop balanced on my knees at 11 at night. None of it felt heroic at the time. It felt like logistics. It felt like the obvious thing. If you love someone, you figure out how to show up, even when showing up is inconvenient and expensive and exhausting. But those small, unglamorous choices were what Mr. Osei put in front of the judge. They were the record of who I actually was in relation to Granddaughty versus who my father's side was trying to claim I had been. There's something I've learned about how things actually work, not theoretically but in the lived experience of it. The truth has a texture that fabrication doesn't. When you've actually done the right thing over a long period of time, the documentation exists. The dates line up. The witnesses are real people who will get on the stand and say what they saw because what they saw was real. My father's case was a feeling suspicion dressed in legal language with nothing underneath it. My case was letters in Granddaughty's handwriting, bank transfers, a doctor's assessment, 3 years of Mrs. Fairweather's notes. The truth had receipts. That's not cynical. That's just what it looks like when you've genuinely been present for someone. What I keep sitting with is the question of clarity. Not intelligence in the narrow sense, not grades or credentials, but the kind of clear-eyed thinking that lets you see a situation for what it is, make a plan, and follow it. Granddaughty had it. She saw exactly what her family was capable of, and she prepared accordingly, quietly, without drama. Mr. Osei had it. That calm, thorough way of his that I came to trust completely. And I had to find it in myself, in the months between learning what my father was doing and walking into that courtroom. Not panic, not rage. Just, what do I have? What do I need? What is the next step? The maple is budding. Pip is home. The index card with the butter tart recipe was in the second drawer, exactly where she would have put it. I held on. And it turned out that holding on was the whole answer.